Did you know that the OG Buddha, also known as Siddhartha Gautama, prophesied the coming of a future Buddha who would be known for loving kindness? And in this video, I'm going to give you 5 good reasons, 5 compelling reasons why the Buddha's prophecies align with the story of Yeshua, or Jesus Christ. And be sure to stay tuned until the very end, because even if I don't convince you by the end of this video that the Buddha was prophesying the story of Jesus, there is nonetheless a very interesting connection between the concepts of Buddhahood and Christ consciousness. But before we get into the juicy stuff, do boop that like button for me, and if you are at all interested in grounded spirituality, you should hit the subscribe button, because that is what we talk about here. That is the path that I walk. It is the content that I share. My name is Kiara. I am an ordained metaphysical minister, specializing in integral consciousness and the feminine face of God, so the Divine Mother or the Divine Feminine. And that is one half of my life, and the other half of my life is building businesses. I am a startup junkie, although it's a little bit on the back burner right now. The last company that I built or co-founded was valuated at $10 million. And I share that just to make the point that I have one foot in the world of the spiritual and the mystical and the woo, and the other foot planted firmly in this 3D reality. And I don't know what's more 3D than business. And that's why here at Earth Schooled, we talk about all of it, the mundane human things as well as the magic that underpins it all. This idea that God is always interfacing with us if we have eyes to see and ears to hear. Okay, last couple of plugs. If you like my t-shirt, I designed it. It's over on my store. TikTok seems to really like it. And on that note, if you are on TikTok, be sure to check out Earth Schooled, because for whatever reason, this content does really well over there. Let's start with the prophecy itself. It is scattered across multiple cultures and texts, and it's important to realize that the teachings and stories of the Buddha were passed down verbally for centuries before they were codified into text. But these snippets of prophecy from different places all say the same thing about this idea of a future Buddha known as Maitreya. Maitreya translates to loving kindness or benevolence. It has a connection to the Pali word metta, which may be familiar if you're familiar with metta meditation. Say that 5 times fast. Metta meditation, metta meditation, metta meditation, metta meditation, metta meditation. Nailed it! Metta meditation is a type of meditation on loving kindness, and so it's in the name. The Buddha, the OG Buddha, also prophesied that this coming Buddha, Maitreya, would be a fully enlightened being that taught a pure Dharma. I'm going to read you a version of the prophecy from the Gospel of Buddha by Karis, and I was able to trace this back to even older texts, because I knew that this was compiled by him from different Buddhist texts and English translations, but it also looks like it came from Ceylon sources, so over in Sri Lanka area, as well as the first few sentences are basically a direct quote from a book called the Chakavati Siddhantanta. I think I just butchered that, I'm sorry. I'll put the words up. The Karis version goes, "I am not the first Buddha who came upon the earth, nor shall I be the last. In due time another Buddha will arise in the world, a holy one, a supremely enlightened one, endowed with wisdom and conduct auspicious, knowing the universe, an incomparable leader of men, a master of angels and mortals. He will reveal to you the same eternal truths which I have taught you. He will preach his religion, glorious in its origin, glorious at the climax, and glorious at the goal. He will proclaim a religious life, wholly perfect and pure, such as I now proclaim. His disciples will number many thousands, while mine number many hundreds." First, let's talk about the words in the prophecy itself, this idea that Maitreya is an incomparable leader of men, a master of angels and mortals. It aligns very much with the Christian idea that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine, that he was not just guiding humanity, but also the spiritual realm. It brings to mind that verse in Revelation 19:16, he is King of Kings, he is Lord of Lords. The prophecy also says that the future Buddha will reveal the same eternal truths as the OG Buddha did, and anyone who has studied comparative religion is well aware of the similarities, the parallels that exist between Christianity and Eastern traditions. In fact, this is so prevalent that a number of people believe that Jesus actually went east in the lost years. So there's this period of Jesus's life where we don't know where he went, mostly his young adult life. And a lot of people have hypothesized that he went to India or to Tibet. Some people say that he studied with the Essenes. Other people said that he studied with the Druids. And they've all got really interesting reasons for that. Video for another day, but suffice to say that if we take a mystical lens to the Bible as opposed to a strictly dogmatic lens, we really do see these parallels begin to emerge between the teachings of Christ and the Eastern traditions that predated Christ. Maitreya is described as the Buddha of loving compassion, and that mirrors a lot of the core principles of Yeshua's teachings. These notions of love, compassion, forgiveness, and kindness to all. Arguably, one of Jesus's most famous quotes is Matthew 12:31, love your neighbor as yourself. And he embodies these principles of forgiveness and compassion throughout his ministry, right? He's healing the lame and the sick and those with leprosy and the blind, and he's protecting women from being stoned. I'll keep it real, y'all. Christianity was the biggest turnoff for me for the longest time because what I grew up around was really like angry evangelical types, right? And there was so much judgment if you didn't fit within their very narrow box of what they deemed acceptable that I was like, whatever they're doing, whatever cool, like cult Kool-Aid, human haterade they're drinking, I want no part of it. And the great irony is that when I was synchronistically guided to pick up the Bible and read the story of Jesus and read the red words, it's so heart-centered. Like, his teachings were not just in the stories he told, right? His parables. It was so much in the story he lived. He embodied a level of kindness that we almost never see in our human lives. And there's a lot of ways that you can interpret the Bible, whether literally or metaphorically, but the general gist is that this enlightened being comes to earth and dies for us in order to show us something, in order to show us the way to something, in order to gift us something. And he did it because he loved unconditionally. So needless to say, those ideas of loving compassion are at the very heart of the story of Christ. Let's talk about Birthplace. Early Pali Canon does not seem to say anything about the location of Maitreya, where he would be born, but in later schools of Buddhism, this idea starts to emerge that Maitreya would be born in a place that was very significant, culturally significant during that time period. Well, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, also known as the city of David. Bethlehem held great significance in Jewish prophecy and history. The prophet Micah predicted, "You, Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel." Bethlehem was the birthplace of King David. It is also where he was anointed by the prophet Samuel, and so it was already significant to the Jews. And then also the fact that the Messiah was born in this same place, which is fulfilling these messianic, is that the word? But basically the prophecies of the Messiah who would come from the line of David. So the birthplace is interesting. I think it's one of the less compelling points. Let me give you what I think is one of the most compelling points. Let's talk about the concept of a pure Dharma. Jesus is the only figure in the history of humanity to be acknowledged by all other religions as a spiritual master of sorts. Maybe not the Jews, okay? Maybe they're the exception, but they still might see him as a rabbi, which is a kind of spiritual teacher. But to the Christians, he's obviously a Messiah. To Muslims, he is a prophet. Many Buddhists will refer to him as a kind of bodhisattva, although some people also hold to the idea that in order for someone to be a Buddha, they have to die of natural causes, and Jesus obviously didn't die of natural causes. And then Hindus will call him a guru or a yogi or someone who embodied Shiva consciousness or Christ consciousness. And Yogananda talks a lot about that in his landmark book, Autobiography of a Yogi, one of the most influential spiritual texts of all time. So while people will never unanimously agree on religion, it is very interesting that there is so much reverence for Yeshua's teachings across cultures. And what I love is that so much of it is about love. And that was not common back in that day, right? In so many ways, Yeshua was a revolutionary. He was a systems buster, right? He was like out the door with the dogma, in with the message of God. And this idea of God as love, it was not like a normal idea back then, right? You might see it a little bit in some polytheistic religions, like a deity that embodies divine love, but this idea of God as love was crystallized in the teachings of Christ. He encapsulates it so beautifully and so simply when he says things like, love your neighbor as yourself, love one another as I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Like the difference between what he was talking about, the God he was talking about, the God he was embodying, the difference between that and Old Testament God is like night and day, right? I call Old Testament God Old Testy because he's like killing babies and turning people into pillars of salt and like wiping entire generations off the face of the earth. So that perhaps pure Dharma that Christ brought and embodied ruffled some feathers, didn't it? Last but not least, let's discuss timeline. So the idea is that Maitreya will come after a time of severe moral decline, and he will bring with him this spiritual reformation and this moral reformation. There's also some versions of that prophecy or snippets of the prophecy that say that he will come 2,000 to 5,000 years after the death of OG Buddha. And we know that Christ came like 500 to 600 years after the death of Buddha. But we also know that Christ is not supposed to be a one-hit wonder, right? In Christianity, it's believed that he will come back. And I don't know if you saw the opening ceremony for the Olympics, but it's beginning to look a lot like end times. Many Christians believe that Christ's return will it'll bring a couple of things. One is the apocalypse, which that word actually just means unveiling, and that's a very fun rabbit hole to go down, but video for another day. And the other thing is that he will also bring this time of spiritual and moral reformation. So it starts to sound quite a bit like Maitreya. And I think we are living in those times. You can call it end times, new beginnings, the age of Aquarius. I made videos about this, a lot of videos about this a few years ago, talking about the prophecies on either side of the Atlantic in indigenous communities and otherwise, the astrology, all of which would indicate that it is the time we are living in right now. Like, it is happening. It is beginning to unfold. So here's the thought I want to leave off on. There's this idea that Jesus was a man and Christ is a consciousness, right? To be anointed. What if Maitreya, like Christ, is a consciousness, and that's what all these teachers have been trying to teach us to access all along. And what would it look like in the world for that to happen, for the consciousness of humanity to flower? But what do you think? Could Jesus be the prophesied Maitreya Buddha? At the very least, it's an interesting thought experiment that kind of stretches traditional boundaries of how people like to look at this, right? People like to stay in their lane, but when you start exploring these different traditions, I always say that they're like spokes on a wheel pointing inward to a central truth. And that truth is that we are one consciousness manifesting as infinite possibilities. In any case, thank you so much for joining me on Earth Schooled today. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Be sure to like, subscribe, and if you like the t-shirt, it's on my store. May our Father, Mother, God keep you and your loved ones happy, safe, and blessed, and I will see you next time.